He was just a boy, sitting alone on a park bench, wiping silent tears from his eyes. No one stopped, no one noticed, except one woman, a stranger in torn clothes, carrying a plastic bag and a heart full of kindness. She sat beside him, and without saying a word, pulled him close. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know who was watching, but someone was, from the shadows, a man in a black SUV, a millionaire. A father, his hands trembled on the steering wheel. His eyes locked on a moment so pure, so powerful it brought him to tears, because that boy wasn't just any child, he was his son, the child he had walked away from years ago. And the woman holding him, she wasn't just a stranger, she was about to change everything. This is not just a story about a mother's love, it's a story about the moment that shattered a millionaire's heart and gave him a reason to finally come home. Stay with me, because what happens next will make you believe in second chances, in quiet heroes, and in the kind of love that money can never buy. Sometimes, the most powerful moments happen when no one thinks they're being watched. Not in boardrooms, not on red carpets, but in quiet corners of the world, where the heart leads without knowing who's looking. She didn't look like much to anyone passing by. Tired clothes, wore knout sandals, hair tied back with a faded ribbon. She wasn't there to impress the world. She was there because her son needed fresh air, and that little patch of grass in the park was the only vacation they could afford. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the world slows down, kids running, dogs barking, laughter floating through the breeze like music nobody composed. But in one corner, a boy sat with tears rolling down his face. And beside him, his mother, still silent, waiting. She didn't ask him to stop crying. She didn't tell him to man up or be strong. She just placed her hand gently on his back, a quiet gesture, simple, soft, steady, the kind of love that doesn't shout, but saves. She had no idea that someone across the park had seen it all. A man sitting in the back seat of a luxury SUV, tinted windows rolled down just enough to breathe. Designer suit, wristwatch worth more than her yearly rent. A man used to closing $1,000,000 deals. But now frozen, his world paused, watching something money could never buy. He wasn't just any man. He was the boy's father, and yet, he hadn't earned that title in years. He had walked away when the boy was still in diapers, blinded by ambition, drowned in deals. He told himself he wasn't ready. He told himself she'd be better off without him. And maybe, for a while, he believed that lie. But time has a strange way of circling back. And on this day, it hit him like a tidal wave. Everything he'd built couldn't fill the hole left by that little boy's laughter. And the woman he once left behind, she wasn't broken. She was braver than he'd ever been. He watched her pull a crumpled napkin from her bag and gently wipe the boy's cheeks. No rush, no frustration. Just love, patient and powerful. She whispered something, and though he couldn't hear it, he saw the boy's lips curve into the beginning of a smile. The man leaned forward in his seat. He hadn't seen his son in over 5 years. Not since the court papers. Not since he walked out the door with a suitcase and a selfish dream. He had money now, success, a penthouse overlooking the city, but he didn't have this. He didn't have the power to stop a boy's tears, or the courage to face the woman who never gave up. The boy leaned into his mother's arms, small hands wrapping around her waist, and for a moment she closed her eyes, as if holding him was the only thing that kept her together. As if love alone had been her survival. The millionaire father turned his face away, for the first time in years. He cried, not from pain, not from failure, but from the ache of knowing he'd missed everything that truly mattered. He could buy the park, he could buy the bench, he could buy the trees and pave the grass in gold, but he could never buy that moment, that purity, that quiet miracle of a mother comforting her son with nothing but her presence. And she didn't know he was there, didn't know his heart was breaking with every second, didn't know that the man who once abandoned her was now watching her with reverence and regret. She had moved on not with anger, but with strength. She never begged, She never chased. She built a world from scraps. She fed her child with love when the fridge was empty. She taught him how to stand, even when she could barely walk herself. And now, the boy was growing, not into a man defined by riches, but into a soul shaped by resilience, by tenderness, by a mother's love that never once gave up, even when the whole world did. Across the field, the father gripped the edge of his seat. He wanted to run to them, to drop to his knees and say, "I'm sorry," to tell his son that he had missed him every single day. But how do you interrupt a moment so sacred without ruining it? How do you re-enter a story you walked away from when the real hero has already been written in every chapter? He thought money could fix everything, but in this moment, he saw what real wealth looked like. A woman with empty pockets but a full heart. A child who knew what it felt like to be held, to be heard, to be healed. A moment that would never make headlines, but would live forever in the soul of a boy becoming a man. He rolled the window up. The car pulled away, and still she never knew he was there, but he would never forget that bench, that tear, that hug. He would never forget them. As the car turned the corner and disappeared into traffic, his chest still ached from what he had witnessed. It wasn't just guilt. It was a realization, so raw, so loud, it silenced every excuse he had ever made. He had watched stock charts rise and fall. He had closed billion-dollar deals with a pen and a handshake. But nothing in his life had ever shaken him like the sight of that boy, his boy, clutching the only real strength he had ever known, his mother. Back in the park, the moment had passed. The boy was smiling now, wiping the last of his tears. And she, tired but content, reached into her bag and pulled out a bruised apple and a half-folded sandwich. It wasn't much, but to them it was enough, because when love is the foundation, even crumbs feel like feasts. Meanwhile, the father sat alone in the back of his luxury apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, city skyline, a world that sparkled outside but felt empty within. He replayed the scene in his mind like a looped film, the gentle way she held him. The whisper he couldn't hear, the strength in her silence. He picked up his phone, scrolled to her name, paused. What could he possibly say now? "Hi, it's me." "No, too weak." "I saw you at the park." "No." That sounded wrong. "Thank you for raising our son when I wasn't man enough to stay." Yes, that's what his heart wanted to say, but he didn't send it. He stared at her number and deleted the message. Because truth be told, he wasn't ready, not yet. He thought about the last time he saw her, the argument, the door slamming, the look in her eyes that said, "I don't need you," but he does. And he had walked away anyway. Back then, he told himself he was doing it for them, to give them a better future, to get rich first, then return, but deep down he knew. He was running from responsibility, not racing towards success. That day at the park didn't just stir old memories. It shattered the illusion he'd built for years. That money makes you a man. That success can replace presence. That someday he'd come back and make everything right with a single gesture. But that day made one thing clear. She never needed his money. She needed his presence. And when he vanished, she didn't fall apart. She rose up, brick by brick, tier by tier. She became mother, father, protector, and provider. And her son, he didn't grow bitter. He grew brave. He didn't learn greed. He learned gratitude, because his mother showed him what true wealth looks like: sacrifice without asking for anything in return. And now, the father, for all his power, sat in a penthouse filled with silence. A silence wealth couldn't fix. He thought of reaching out to her mother, offering money, a new apartment, a better school. But something stopped him, because deep down he knew this wasn't about money. It was about something money could never earn back. Time lost, moments missed, trust broken. Across the city, she sat by the window with her son. He had fallen asleep on her lap, arms still clinging to her shirt. She looked at him the way only a mother could, with exhaustion in her bones but peace in her heart. She didn't know who had been watching them. She didn't know the man who once broke her heart had seen her at her strongest. She didn't know she had reminded him of who he used to be, and who he still had the chance to become. Because sometimes fate doesn't knock loudly. Sometimes it just leaves a crack in the door, and whether we walk through or not, that choice is ours. The next morning, the father stood by the mirror, suit pressed, coffee untouched. But his reflection no longer impressed him. For years he had been admired, envied, feared, but now he just wanted to be known by the only boy who had ever mattered. He left the office early, not for a meeting, but for something more important. He found himself back at the park, the same bench, the same trees, only now it was empty. They weren't there. He waited. Minutes turned to an hour, but still, no sign. And that's when he realized something that hurt more than any loss he'd ever known. She had moved on. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with dignity. She hadn't raised his son to wait for a savior. She had taught him to stand on his own feet, to walk forward, without needing the man who walked away. And that realization, it didn't just break him, it changed him, because for the first time, he didn't want to come back as a millionaire. He wanted to come back as a father, even if it was too late. And maybe, just maybe, there was still time to try, and maybe, just maybe, there was still time to try, but this time he wouldn't come with promises wrapped in gold. He wouldn't knock on her door offering comfort disguised as cash. No, he would come bare, no excuses, no rehearsed speeches, just a man ready to face the wreckage he left behind and earn his place one honest step at a time. He started small. He visited the same park every Sunday, the same hour, sat on the farthest bench, never close enough to intrude, just watching, waiting, hoping. 3 weeks passed before he saw them again. His heart raced. There they were, the boy, a little taller, the mother, just as graceful. They sat under the same tree, sharing the same small meal. It was like a scene frozen in time, except now he was different. This time he didn't hide behind tinted glass. He stepped out, no suit, no driver, just a simple sweater, hands trembling with something he hadn't felt in years, humility. He stayed at a distance, afraid to shatter what they had, but the boy noticed him. Their eyes met. There was no recognition, no spark of memory, just curiosity, and it broke his heart in two, because in that single glance, he realized something deeper than regret. His own son didn't even know who he was. The mother looked up. Her eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, time stopped. No words, no expressions, just silence heavy with history. She rose slowly, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder. Not angry, not afraid, but guarded, like someone who had rebuilt her world from dust and wasn't about to let it crumble again. He took a step forward, then paused. "I'm not here to take anything," he said softly, his voice cracked. I saw you that day at the park. I never meant to watch. I just couldn't look away." She didn't move, didn't blink, only listened. "I know I don't deserve a second chance," he continued. "I missed everything that mattered. I chased the world and lost my family. That's on me." He looked down at his shoes, swallowed hard, then looked at the boy. His boy, "You don't know me," he said, "but I know you. I remember when you were born. I remember your laugh, and I remember how I failed both of you." The mother finally spoke. Her voice was calm, firm. "Why now?" He took a breath, because that moment, watching you hold him, it shattered everything I thought I was. I've been successful, respected, but none of it means anything if I can't be part of his life, even from a distance. She looked at him for a long time, then back at her son, and what she saw there surprised her. The boy wasn't afraid, he wasn't confused, he was curious. "Can I talk to him?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. The man crouched down. He looked into the boy's eyes and said the only thing that truly mattered. "I don't expect you to call me Dad. I don't expect anything at all. I just want you to know I'm sorry, and I'm here if you ever want to talk." The boy didn't say a word, but he nodded, a simple gesture, small but full of meaning, because sometimes the most powerful beginnings don't start with words. They start with presence. Over the weeks that followed, the man returned to the park. He never pushed, never forced. He brought a football once, sat near the trees and waited. Eventually, the boy joined him, then came laughter. then small conversations, and slowly, walls began to fall. He never tried to replace her. He knew she was the real hero, but he also knew healing starts where pride ends, and she saw that too. She didn't forgive him overnight, but she saw the change, not in his words but in his consistency. One rainy afternoon, he offered them a ride home. She declined politely, but the boy looked at her, then at him, and said, "Can we?" She paused, then nodded, and that small drive was the first time they shared a space together in years. No shouting, no blaming, just silence and hope. As time went on, the boy began asking questions about the past, about why his father left, and the man this time didn't lie. He told the truth about fear, about failure, about how easy it is to run, and how hard it is to return, and somehow in that honesty a bridge began to form. One day, months later, the boy held his father's hand, and the man, this powerful, broken, healing man, cried again. Not out of guilt, not out of shame, but because he was finally feeling something real. Redemption. And the mother, she watched all of it quietly. She didn't need revenge. She didn't want apologies dressed in luxury. All she wanted was for her son to have both arms holding him up this time, and maybe now, he finally did. Time didn't erase the past, but it gave them something just as rare, a second chance, and that chance didn't come with fireworks. It came with quiet mornings, walking side by side, with school projects done together, with weekend park visits that no longer felt like distant observations, but shared moments, real moments. The man no longer saw himself as a millionaire. The cars, the condo, the stocks, they all meant less now, because every time his son laughed, every time his son asked, "Are you coming this weekend?" he realized this was the fortune he was meant to earn. And the woman, the one who once stood alone, holding her child like armor against the world. She didn't forget what he did, but she began to see what he was doing now, and for her, that meant more than any apology ever could. There were still moments of silence between them, not the silence of pain, but of peace, because some stories aren't about the perfect ending. They're about people who keep choosing to begin, again and again. One day, on the same bench where it all began, the three of them sat together. The boy, now older, looked up and said, "I'm glad you came back." The father's throat tightened. He nodded, holding back tears. "I almost didn't," he whispered, "but your mom, she never let me forget what I was walking away from." The boy turned to his mother, and in that moment, the millionaire father and the once forgotten man realized she had always been the hero. Not just for her son, but for him too, because her love hadn't just raised a child, it had awakened a man. And as the sun set over the park, nothing grand happened. No speeches, no applause, just three souls. Healed together. They say wealth is counted in dollars, but in that quiet moment, a mother's strength, a father's redemption, a boy's forgiveness, that was priceless. So if you're listening to this, remember something. Sometimes the richest moments in life come not from what we earn, but from what we're brave enough to return to. She didn't know he was watching that day, but what she gave him in that single, selfless act was more than he ever gave her in a lifetime. She gave him a reason to begin again,